Thank you. Thank you. And good morning. I have to say I'm personally thrilled to be here in Munich at a Typo3 conference. I've got a long history in PHP development, and I've always had many friends from the Typo3 world, but I've never actually had the chance to attend your conference before, so thank you for having me today. It's great. A little about me. I'm the Vice President of Customer Success at PlatformSH, longtime PHP developer. I had a chance a long time ago to actually have an indirect influence on some of the code that went into Typo3 with your Solar module. I'm glad to hear it works really well. And as you can see, I'm really fond of Munich and I feel right at home here. We'll help you avoid that. And then you'll also see how that can be relevant to Typo3 in the cloud. So a web application, when you're deploying a web application, it consists of three things, and it's very important to keep these three things separate in your mind. Code, obviously, Typo3 is code. We write code, we write CSS code, we write PHP code, we write Golang and Haskell code and whatever. But there's also infrastructure. So that's your server, your VPS, your box in the cloud, whatever, but it's also the services that run on top of that. So it's not just the physical hardware, but it's the software, including the operating system, including MySQL and Redis and Solar and anything else that has to be on those servers for your application to run. And that's a very important component of a web application, but that's not all. Web applications also have data. They're not these stateless things that you just plug onto a box and it runs. Without the data, without the content, without the products, without the contacts, the images, all of that, then your web application is actually nothing. It's just a demo site that maybe you can install and click around on, but it's not really a web application. It has no purpose. And if you don't have all three of these things all the time in a consistent state that you can predict, guess what? Your boat's going to crash when you deploy. So we're going to talk about how to make sure your deployments take care of all three of those things. Now, deployment is a process. It's not just a moment in time. It starts when a developer is working on their laptop and thinking about the new features and styling something and writing some CSS. And then they push it somewhere to, let's call it stage. And you're staging the site. Maybe you're testing it there as well. Maybe you have a CI process where maybe you've got a Jenkins and a Selenium. Woo, woo. Finally, you go to prod, and then the site's live. But actually, all those blue arrows that you have there are also deployments. You actually deploy from your local machine to a staging or a dev server. You deploy from the dev server to the production server. And if you think about it that way and treat each deployment as its own chance to practice, then you're already preparing yourself to not have a crash. Now, we work on teams, right? If you factor in a couple more things into there, like Bob, Jim, Sally, and Jane, who all are developing on your team, and maybe that company you hired in the Ukraine that is working on that really hard back-end problem, and that Romanian company that's helping you with the front end, then you've got a lot of people who are doing deployments. So it doesn't actually look like just dev, stage, prod. It looks like more like Bob local to feature one to like that, right? There are a lot of deployments going on. So how do I know that this is a problem, and why should I even be talking about it? Go look at Stack Overflow. Pick any web application and just look at the problems people have. How to migrate from a test environment to a development environment. I've got broken image links after migrating from my local machine to a VPS or a live server. I've got my home page missing and the theme and CSS are gone after I've migrated. Updating a PHP version breaks my site. Dealing with Solar indexes when you're developing versus in production. These are all things that you can easily find and confirm on Stack Overflow as acute, critical problems that stand in the way of web developers and their successful deployments. So you really want to think about these things, because even when you think things are going well and everything's going to be great, you might find out at the very last minute that your ass is on the line. take another look at that. That is not the experience that you want to have when you go live. Okay, so let's introduce the framework. Orchestrated, consistent, and deterministic. I want your deployments to be O.C.D. What does that mean? Orchestrated, planned to produce a desired result. That simply means when you do something, you've got it all planned out how it's going to work, and the result that you get at the end is the desired result, not that unexpected result. So in web applications, a deployment that is orchestrated does things like it resolves dependencies that your code has. It builds the code. We use Composer these days, so you are familiar with building code, but there's also Sass and npm install and grab those Ruby gems, et cetera, et cetera. Code gets built. We don't write the code that runs the web application these days. We write the code that describes the code that builds the web application. So it's a little abstracted, but that's the world we live in. Orchestration will also provision the servers, the storage, the network needed for your application. And it will launch critical services or make sure they're configured right or available, such as MySQL, such as Redis, Solr. And it will also manage the data, because that's an important part of any web application. Orchestration will also, if it's designed right, guarantee the high availability for all of your services so that you have no single points of failure, guarantee disaster recovery so that even if something catastrophic happens, you can recover your site, guarantee change management for all services so that when that fat sloppy cow comes out and clobbers your Linux machine, you know that you don't have a zero-day vulnerability because you've got an upgrade management process for patching things. And for every developer and every tester, as well as in production, you've got the same thing, okay? That's orchestration. That's a huge goal. So I'm going to be showing you examples today from PlatformSH, which is the cloud hosting company that I work for, which has provided the infrastructure and know-how for giving you the Typo 3 version 8 preview in the cloud. So as part of what I'm going to be showing you, you can try this, and I'm going to give you the links and show you how it's done. But all of the examples are taken from Typo 3 in the cloud on PlatformSH, achieving O.C.D deployment. So the first part of that is that when you launch Typo 3 in the cloud on PlatformSH, you need to describe a couple things that it needs for that orchestration. For example, you need to describe that Typo 3 wants to run on PHP 7. You have other options, including earlier versions of PHP or even hip-hop VM, and you could write that there, but we've chose PHP 7 for the preview, and we also describe with this very short YAML that the flavor is Composer, which means that Composer will be used to build the main code. That means it will look for a Composer JSON and a Composer lock file. You also described in the same file the PHP extensions that you want to have available. You describe the services that you want to have available for the application. You could also very easily switch that from Solr to Elasticsearch, or from MySQL to PostgreSQL, or you could add a MongoDB if you wanted. By describing these services in that file, when you commit that code, you get what you ask for on PlatformSH. You get the services. You'll describe important things like the cron jobs that are needed to keep the site healthy, and in that way, you plan the orchestration of your deployment. Okay? Obviously, we're talking about a PHP application, but you and I know that Typo 3 sites don't run the entire internet, only parts of it. So they need to work together with other things like PIMs, CRMs, web services, Python workers that do crazy things with data. And you might yourself have, in your agency or your portfolio, Node.js applications running on MongoDB or even other PHP applications. So when you take this Typo 3 preview in the cloud on PlatformSH, you also have the freedom to run other things in these other languages and orchestrate them the same way. And you can choose from an array of modern and interesting services that you can call upon with those easy examples to run those applications. If you want to extend your Typo 3 application with a RabbitMQ, for example, because you've got some data processing to do, or you need to work with an order management system somewhere else in the universe of the web that you're building, you can have that. And if you want to scale, you can scale. You can scale this application to hundreds of CPUs and a terabyte of RAM, and we can scale it back down for you when it's done. We've got a very progressive, extremely battle-tested architecture that has triple redundancy at every critical point, including the Galera database, which has master, master, master configuration, so you never lose a transaction, and you never have to take the site offline when you scale. And this is all part of what's available as part of the Typo 3 cloud preview that we're going to be focusing on. Okay, so that's the orchestrated part of O.C.D. You need to plan the deployment to have a desired effect. But it also has to be consistent. And when I say consistent, I don't just mean every time you go into production it's the same. I mean it's consistent on every environment that you want to test on. Because you don't want to invest in your unit tests, invest in some person clicking through and doing a sanity test and trying out some of the features, invest in the visual regression tests, invest in the Selenium tests for functional testing. There are all sorts of testing frameworks that you can invest in, but if you have one thing different on your infrastructure and the wrong data, the tests are either going to fail or pass based on that, and they're useless too if there's not this consistency. So consistent is acting or done in the same way over time. And in terms of deployment, there's a consolidation in the web development universe to deploying using only one methodology, and that is git push. And if you do anything else when you deploy, then it's wrong. You heard it here. Anything else that's involved in your deployment that's not git push is wrong. I expect lots of tweets on that one. Robert Douglas says. So an O.C.D. deployment will guarantee that you always use the same tools to deploy, whether it's on your testing environment, your staging environment, or going into production. Okay, and the tools that I believe are the right ones are obviously git push. And then knowing when you deploy from local to dev to test to stage that it will work the same way, consistently, because the environment's the same, the data's the same, the services are the same, the code's the same. You have to have the consistent infrastructure, and you have to have real data. It's just not enough to have some sample products or some sample content and hope that your production, your deployment onto your live site will actually work. And it will allow you to practice deployments. Now, imagine if I could go back to those ship builders and say, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, in order to avoid this catastrophic failure of you putting your ship in the water, I would like you to practice launching that ship into the water 20 times. I was like, they can't do that. That's really hard. But with code, you can do that. You can actually practice your deployment. So on PlatformSH, if I commit a feature to my development environment that's personally mine, only mine for my feature, I'm practicing the exact same deployment on that feature branch that I'll get when I go into production. So you actually, by the time I merge that then into a different branch, and then a staging branch, and everybody tests it, and then merge it into production, I might have practiced my deployment 20 to 30 times. So how does that work? There are two phases in a consistent deployment on PlatformSH. The first one is git push. That's how you trigger it all. That's how new code enters the system. So Platform goes and it looks at the services that you've asked for, and it assembles the containerized versions of those. So it'll have MySQL in a container and Redis in a different container, or multiple containers if it's a high availability. It'll install the dependencies from rubygems to npm install, pip if you've got Python dependencies, obviously composer dependency as well. It gets all of those, puts them on the file system. It runs build flavor commands that in this case would be compose install. It runs a build hook, which is a script that you provide as a developer to organize your code or complete the building of the code in such a way that it's ready to run. That could include compiling your SAS. And finally, after it's done that successfully, it basically has code which is ready for production, and it puts that onto a read-only file system that's very similar to a CD-ROM. Can't ever be changed. It's packed in really tight, so it takes up very little space. And then it goes ahead and it freezes the container applications, which are what are currently running your application. So then, it holds the requests. So imagine an Nginx server with a big bucket catching all the requests. It's catching them and holding them like Atlas. And it does some things with the file system. It updates the services. It attaches the file mounts, it does a whole bunch of things, it puts your code into place, and then when everything's fine, it runs what we call deploy hooks, which are another opportunity you have as a developer to do things on the running application. What would you do on a running application as a developer? How about update doctrine? You've got schema changes in your database, that's the point where you can apply the schema changes. You need to clear cache, that's the point where you can clear your cache. You need to import some content or products, that's the point where you've got the running application, no requests are coming in, so it's safe to do things in code on the running application. As soon as the deploy hook is done, all those requests that are being caught by the Nginx then go on to the running application. Hopefully that can be done in a minute or 2 minutes, and you've got a deploy that is very safe, very consistent, and if any part of that fails, it simply doesn't do the deployment. It goes back to the version that you had before. Just like, oh, that didn't work, throw all that trash away, let's just keep on as we were, no changes. So it's quite safe in that respect. Okay, finally, O.C.D. We have orchestrated, we have consistent, now deterministic. Deterministic means that for every event there exist conditions that could cause no other event. That basically means if I throw a ball into the air in a vacuum and there's gravity, I know where it's going to land. There's no other place it can land. I predict what's going to happen because there can be no other result. Now, there are lots of parts of that, but one of the big philosophies that make that work is having everything the application needs described in the code. So those YAML files that I was showing you, you put those in special folders in your code base, and when you launch your application, there's the description for the infrastructure right alongside the code, and you can version that. So you've got versioned infrastructure that matches one-to-one with an exact version of your code. If your new e-commerce feature or your new publishing feature requires new infrastructure, then you version the code and the infrastructure together. If I deploy that code base, I get that infrastructure. If I roll back to a previous code base, I get the infrastructure that was previously running that code. So it's very deterministic. When you push a Git branch or a Git commit to PlatformSH, it actually makes a hash, and I've got a diagram of that. There's the CD-ROM. It makes a Git hash, and it associates that Git hash with the compressed read-only file system that represents your built code, including the description of the infrastructure. And forevermore, if you ever push that same Git hash, like if you have to revert or you have to test, go back in time and push that hash to a different branch just to go back and test some stuff. Like, why did it work back then and it doesn't work now? Or the customer's saying there was a bug on it 3 weeks ago. Can I prove that? Let's get the hash from 3 weeks ago. You can deploy not just the same code, nicht das gleiche, dasselbe. It's really the same file system that gets then mounted, and you've got extreme deterministic behavior when you push with Git. So that's great for code, but with deterministic infrastructure, that's a whole new ballgame. That's something that most of us have never experienced before. It's obvious that you want to use the same services, the same configuration on every environment because you want that consistency, you know, whether it's dev, staging, production, etc. But it's less obvious that you want to be able to roll back that infrastructure on command if something goes wrong. So usually we go and we update MySQL and we update Redis and we update all that stuff, and then it's basically a done deal, right? We reconfigure it and there's virtually no way to go back to a previous state. On PlatformSH, you describe the state of your infrastructure in the code that you deploy, and you can go back to it any time you want. You want a different version of MySQL? It's right there in the code, historically saved. You can go back to it anytime you want. And O.C.D. deployment is not a MySQL dump and a MySQL import. That takes way too long. It's not rsyncing the files. I mean, it's good if you want to have the uploaded files and images from the production site on a testing site so you've got the same data, but if you have to use rsync to get it, it's going to take too long, and it's inaccurate. Re-indexing Solr every time you do that, that takes forever. Okay, you don't want to wait that long. Even if Jenkins takes care of it for you and it gives you a great excuse to drink more coffee, you still want something that goes a lot faster. So with PlatformSH and the Typo3 Cloud Preview, you can actually clone all of the data on a production site into any branch that you want for testing purposes in about 2 to 3 minutes, even if it's 50 gigabytes of data. And it's a point-in-time snapshot of all of the data that you have, including the Solr index, including the database, including the uploaded files. Because if you think about how all that works together, if I upload a new image, then it gets stored on the file system, a line gets written into the database, and then it triggers a re-index on Solr, so that there are 3 different sources of data describing this action that I just took. If any one of those is out of synchronization with the others, then you've got a broken website. You could have failing tests that are a false negative. So what we do is we simply snapshot your data in a moment of time, and we make it available for any branch that you're working on. We'll sanitize that data as well in case you need to protect your customers' email addresses or if there's sensitive data in there. And you get consistent data for every testing, developing branch that you've got in a matter of minutes. So if you had to MySQL dump, MySQL import, that would already blow that out of the water in terms of the time that it takes. So the benefits of O.C.D are simple to execute, git push, testable, okay, you can practice your deployment time after time after time before actually going live, repeatable if you need to do it over and over again or rapidly with lots of minor increments, it's very easy to do, and it's also reversible if something goes wrong. Because, like I said at the beginning, when you work really, really hard and build something huge that's going to have a great impact for a lot of people, especially the people you work with and your customers, then you want to know that it's going to go as planned, and it's horrible when you have a surprise at the last minute. So bravo to these people for launching their ship without splattering anybody against the wall. Bravo. Okay, so here are a couple of links that you really want to take a picture of with your smartphone, or if you're just that type of person, memorize them. The first link is something that you've probably visited once in your life, and that's where you will find the link to PlatformSH where you can try the preview online. Every one of you can have a free trial for 30 days, and as many of those as you want. It's fine. We support the Typo3 community. We want you to be able to do demos and show your customers and test Typo3. And if you have special needs and events and you want sponsorship for them, come to me. If you want to have a community site on Typo3 and you want it in the cloud, come to me. I'm happy to support as many of that as I can. And you'll forevermore find this link on the download page. Now, if you want to go directly to where the good stuff is and start the checkout process to try your free trial, then that bit.ly link, so bit.ly/typo3-psh, that's like platform.sh, that will take you directly there. Okay, everybody have a chance? You'll get these slides later, or maybe you've memorized it. Okay, now it is time for, the 30-day free trial. Yeah, you get that. I told you that. Now, it's really time for the demo of the live software. Can somebody tell me how much time I have?
14 minutes left.
Okay, great. Then we're doing really, really well. We'll do the live demo and we'll have time for questions. So, here is a Typo3 version 8 project in the PlatformSH cloud, and this is what you will end up with if you follow one of those links that you just memorized. Now, over here on the left, I have a number of environments. What is an environment? An environment is, in its simplest form, simply a Git branch. An environment is also a complete copy of the running application with all of the services and an exact copy of the production data. That means if I go and show you the master branch, which is synonymous with live site, it looks like this. And as you can see, I've even customized it with my very own page, which looks like this. Yay. Yay me. I used typo 3. These, however, are further copies of the site, each one for a different purpose, and they are on-demand copies. So as you can see, I've planned a sprint. A developer's gone and then they've made another branch underneath that sprint. If I'm a developer and I want to work on the solar feature, because that's like my favorite thing as a developer, then I would simply go and make a branch, and I might have lost my session. Let's see if that actually took. Yeah, it took. And it's going to create that for me, and I can see the logs here about what it's doing. It's going through those 2 flow charts that I showed you. However, since the code is already built, it's not going to bother rebuilding it because that wouldn't be consistent. I haven't made any changes. It's the same git hash after all, so it's actually taking the same code as the parent branch and putting it in place for my branch as well. However, it is giving me new copies of MySQL, Solr, and Redis, and it is giving me a byte-to-byte copy of all of the data that's in those in a moment of time snapshot. So in a few seconds, if I go on long enough in my description and talk to you enough, then I'm going to be able to actually show you that website. It usually takes, I don't know, 1 to 2 minutes depending on what the deploy hooks do. Those are oftentimes the biggest factor in how long the deployment actually takes. Typo 3's deploy hooks are fairly sane. So there it is. Right in front of your very eyes, I created a new copy of the entire site with all of the services, the same data that I can now develop on as a developer for myself. It's, as you see, exactly the same. And there's a workflow. When I'm done with that, I'm going to merge that using this grayed out merge button into the sprint, where the Scrum Master is going to make sure everything's fine. They're going to merge that into the staging, where we're going to show the customer what we've done, and eventually when it comes time to deploy that, that will merge into master. So we've been able to use this hierarchy of Git branches that PlatformSH manages to build a workflow for all the developers that we want to be involved. Now, if I want to add a developer, what does that look like? You can see that that same workflow is available here. I can add a developer at any point in that with specific access permissions, whether they can contribute, whether they're an administrator, or whether they can just observe what's going on, like maybe a project manager would want to do, or a stakeholder, and they have visibility then into that part of the hierarchy. That means if I have that team in the Ukraine or Romania that are helping me out with a back-end, front-end, whatever, I can give them their own branch. They can make their own sprint workflow with as many copies as they need. I can literally onboard a group of 20 new developers onto this project in less than an hour, and each of them have a complete copy of the website with no inconsistencies. How long would that take normally? Okay, you have to write down the requirements, and they've got to set it up, and you've got to test it. It might take days. It takes an hour with this system. So a couple other cool things that you can do here. If you think about one of the problem areas of having multiple copies of your application. Okay, you've got your production application, and then you've got all of those other copies. That's one big difference. One's live, and all of the others aren't. Where is that important? Well, we come from the e-commerce branch. We do tons of e-commerce with Magento Cloud, with Drupal Commerce, with Symfony applications. Spryker's another one that we work with a lot. And payment gateways always have to work the right way. If you think about the problem here, it's kind of critical. Your live application needs to connect to a real payment gateway that takes real payments with real money. All of the other environments need to be able to test the payment gateway and never actually buy anything. So they give you a sandbox, and that has a different URL, a different set of secret access tokens, and managing those over many, many copies of your application is kind of critical. So we give you something called variables, and I can add a variable here called, say, the PayPal key, and it's a secret, and that's going to be on the production environment. I'm going to use that to connect my production environment to the PayPal. Why is it doing that to me? No. PayPal key, secret. There we go. And the nice thing about this is if I then go down into my staging environment and look at the variables there, it's been inherited. I can, however, override that to a different key that I can use for the sandbox. That could even be a structured value in JSON. When I save that, you'll see that those get inherited to all of the underlying environments. And as a PHP developer, all I have to do is read that variable out of a PHP variable at runtime, and I just ask for the PayPal key, and depending on what environment my code's running in, it works correctly. So I no longer have to worry about having one big switch branch, or switch block of code in my bootstrap that says, if on dev do this, if on prod do that. Bad practice. I also no longer have to have some file in my Git repository that has the PayPal secret key, because that breaks the encapsulation of sensitive data. So we've got this very nice system for managing things like that. I will also very briefly show you on a live site. This is my spectacular personal blog that has been updated at least once a year for the last 10 years. And if I look there, you can see I can add domains. I can add as many domains as I want. So if Typo3 is great at doing multi-site, and I know it is, then you can add domains as much as you want. Each can have an SSH certificate, no problem. I can also here specify the behavior of incoming URLs. So this isn't a very comprehensive example, but I can do things like do regular expression rerouting, and I can also take different paths on my domain and route it to different microservices. So PlatformSH by default is optimal when you have several applications working together in a microservice configuration. So maybe you're using Typo3 as a front end and Magento as a back end for e-commerce. Then you can have your Typo3 would be the main URL, and your Magento would be /shop, something like that. You can do that routing here. You can also configure the caching so that you're like whitelisting specific cookies and headers so that the Nginx HTTP cache works properly. And that's all just kind of built into the main product. Another thing for the developers out there is we've built a very nice CLI tool based on Symfony console. It's called Platform. Is that legible? It's pretty good. It's context sensitive, so I'm in the directory on my laptop where that site code exists. And as you can see, it knows all of the branches that I have, including the one that I made for you as part of the demo. And I can switch to any of those. Right now, I'm on the staging branch. I can do things like, well, let me show you what's here. So what's really important is that most of the code that's going to be used is going to be coming from this Composer JSON and Composer lock file. If I want to have a local copy of that, I can always say platform build, and it's going to go read that. I'm not going to, I already did this earlier today up here, and it ran for a while and grabbed a whole bunch of stuff, so it's saying that it doesn't need to do it now. And then I can start my local development. But PlatformSH does some other cool things. For example, if I want to use my local code, but I've got that great data in the cloud. You know, I made a copy of all the data from the production site just for this branch. If I want to access that without having to download it to my local machine, I can easily open tunnels to the running services. So I've just opened tunnels to the Redis and the database services that are up in the Typo3 project in the Platform Cloud. That means using local host host names, I can, how much? 3 minutes, okay. Then I can do a local database connection and a local Redis connection, so I don't have to set those up locally. I just have to start a web server, maybe with like PHP like that. It's a cool command. And then finally, one other thing that you can do with this, which is super useful. Well, there are several things. I'll just show you one, though. If you want to, for example, go into the server environment from the command line tool, you just type PlatformSH, and then you're on the server. Who are you? You work as the web, so you have the same permissions as the web server. If I want to do something stupid like delete my code base, you can't, because it's a read-only file system. Nobody can modify it, not you, not root, not any hacker. And yeah, so the last thing I want to put on the screen and show you before I open it for maybe one or two questions, you can see all this on GitHub. If you visit the PlatformSH GitHub repository, the work that we've done with the Typo 3 Association is all available for you to inspect here. This is the Typo 3 composer plus all of the specific platform files. There are 3 of them in total. The most important one is this platform.app.yaml file, and you can see how all that works. When you do the free trial and you go through the workflow and you end up with your Typo 3 site, all that's happening is it's taking this public repository and cloning it into PlatformSH, and that's what you end up with when you then check that out locally. This is also where you'll find that CLI tool that I just demonstrated. So you can go to the PlatformSH Git repo and download the CLI tool. It's really easy to install with a one-liner. So you just copy it and paste it, and it installs kind of like you do with Composer. And we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Are there any questions for Robert? No.
Back there?
There's one.
Up front?
Boris.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your talk. Is there a reseller model coming up for Typo 3 Association members?
So that's a great question. What we do is we have what we call an agency plan. And that's generally the same thing. And what that means is that there's a discount on the base cost and a provision for any customers that you bring. So yes, the person to talk to is Andrew Melk, who's standing at our booth out there, and he's responsible for the DACH region, so for all of Switzerland, Austria, Germany. But you can talk to him even if you're not from there.
One more question here.
No, just a small remark. Yesterday, Andrew and I discussed that we are going to try to open up like a very special deal, but that's just something that we will do in the next month. I mean,
special deals on the way.
We're still working on on the LTS release in April. So, but nevertheless, don't hold your water and start driving.
Thank you, Olivier.
Olivier, when the deal is ready, where will it be announced?
Yeah. No, there will be certainly communication on the usual channels like Twitter, typo3.org, a news article. There will be certainly a mailing list to the members list. So, there we will let you know. You will hear it.
Okay. Do not forget to follow the Typo 3 Association on Twitter and go to typo3.org from time to time.
The first question was actually in the back there.
From Boris? Okay.
Raise your hand again.
There was a question. Hans. Here we go.
Hi. Does PlatformSH integrate with Atlassian Suite?
I didn't hear. I'm sorry. Can you hold it closer?
Yeah. Does it integrate with the Atlassian Suite?
Oh, yeah. So with Bitbucket directly, yes. So with both GitHub and Bitbucket, if you you can do an integration with Platform, and if you make a merge request or new branch on either Bitbucket or GitHub, it spins up a new environment specifically for testing that. So you can actually look at a merge request there, do your code commenting and review, while clicking around and testing an exact copy of the site with those changes. Good.
Okay, I'd say that's
Thank
it.
you
The
very
next
much.
talk is coming up in a few minutes, or right now. Thank you very much, Robert.
I'll be out here in case you have other questions.